Thank you. Okay. Thank you. Good evening, everybody. Thanks for coming. As Kirsten said, I'm Jim McLaughlin. I'm a lawyer at the Washington Post. I've worked with a number of you over the years in various capacities. I've been on the board of the D.C. Open Government Coalition since its founding, and I believe that was in 2008. Tom Sussman, who's our founding president, 2009. Okay. So we've been doing this event for the past 10 years or so, and I think we have a terrific panel for you tonight. We're going to talk about the importance of open government and transparency, specifically relating to issues of public safety, crime and public safety, because those issues have been top of mind for DC residents, of which I am one. I live in Crestwood. For the last couple of years, I've lived in DC since '99, and I think there's been more concern about violent crime, public safety, violence in the communities in the last year or so than I can remember in my time. Not that it wasn't a problem at times in the past, but it seems to be, unfortunately, a bigger problem lately. We're joined tonight by Niquelle. I'll sort of start on the end there. Niquelle Allen is the director of the DC Office of Open Government. She has been in that role since 2018. The Office of Open Government is kind of the FOIA ombudsman for the city, and I'll let her talk a little bit more about what her office does in a minute. But basically, they're kind of a watchdog agency that monitors and enforces and trains on FOIA compliance and Open Meetings Act compliance in the district. Niquelle is also a proud Tar Heel. She told me before we started she'll be at the ACC tournament tomorrow, and has a lot of experience in DC government and in the private sector, especially in the area of technology, and really brings a lot of that expertise to bear in her current role. Next to Niquelle is Marcus Ellis, the executive director of Peace for DC, a nonprofit organization that works to reduce gun violence in our communities. So, as important a mission as there is these days. Marcus also has extensive DC government experience. He worked in the Bowser administration in a number of senior positions. He was in the DC government in the mayor's office until early 2023, I believe. So now he's, on the requester side of the open government equation, and he'll have a fascinating perspective to bring, having been on both sides of that fence. Marcus is also the founder of help me out, the nonprofit
Giving with a Purpose.
Giving with a Purpose. I'm sorry, Giving with a Purpose. I would encourage you all to go to their website, as I did before this evening. It's a fascinating organization, and Marcus is the founder and CEO, and they're really doing incredible things in the community. And then finally, we have Chris Magnus, who also has extensive experience in government at all levels. He started off in the law enforcement. He really spent his career in law enforcement. Started off as a beat cop, working his way up to police chief in Fargo, which I'm sure there's a Fargo joke to be made there. But,
no, I've heard them all.
Okay, I'm sure you have. In Tucson, in Richmond, California, so he's been a senior law enforcement official. He worked in the federal government as the commissioner of the U.S. Customs and Border Patrol, and his current job since about a year ago is he's the deputy auditor for public safety in D.C., which is an oversight and auditing role that was created specifically by legislation at the request of the D.C. Police Reform Commission. So we have a great panel, and we have a lot of government experience in particular on this panel. Marcus, I wanted to just start with you because you've advocated a public health approach to reducing gun violence. in our communities. And to me, that was just a fascinating concept. And I wondered if you could explain to the audience what you mean by a public health approach, treating gun violence as a public health problem, and what the role of open government is specifically with respect to that.
No, thank you. I appreciate the question. You can hear me well? All right, great. So I did just want to kind of start by saying, you know, in my position at Peace for DC, there are several different roles we play. I've only been there for about a year though. I don't want to date myself. I appreciate you stating that I worked for Mayor Bowser, but I actually started under Mayor Anthony Williams. I was in district government for a total of 23 years. And yeah, so now being on the nonprofit side, it's exciting, but a wealth of experience coming from that position. When we talk about a public health approach, this is really about addressing the underlying factors of violence. Oftentimes, we tend to have an approach that is one that is not a preventive measure. It is a reactive measure that allows us to make an arrest after a crime has been committed, which is something that should, quite frankly, happen. But what are we doing on the other side in terms of addressing so many underlying factors that lead someone into a life of crime? And so, no different than we look at other public health matters, it's the way we should be looking at violence in the District of Columbia and across our nation, to be quite frank.
And you mentioned when we spoke the other day, the concept of violence interrupters, which I also found fascinating, and I wondered if you could explain what that is, and is that something where the public, I mean, in order to diagnose a public health problem, it seems to me you would need accurate data and records about the problem. The public would need that. And what is a violence interrupter, and is that something that the public has enough information about to assess how it's working?
I think that, you know, as we go into the explanation of what a violence interrupter is, it's, your question is a fair one, not only as it relates to data and the access to that data, but violence interruption work, as I'll soon explain, is really only about 20 years old. And so data just isn't important in terms of understanding the work. It's important in terms of understanding and proving that the work can be impactful and that it can work and effectively. And so a violence interrupter is a person who, primarily based on their relationship, they're doing work in some of the most violent communities in the District of Columbia. They're doing their work from a perspective of one who has relationships, who has a connectivity, who has a shared experience with some of the folks that are either the perpetrators or the victims of gun violence, and noting that those are normally the same person. And they are a group with a very unique skill set. With all due respect, and because I state this all the time, if someone broke in my home tomorrow, I'm not calling a violence interrupter, I'm calling the police. But let's be very clear that these folks are intentional about doing their work without a gun, without a badge, just the relationship that they have built and established. And so what we look to do with violence interrupters is, one, at our organization, Peace for DC, we have something we call a Peace Academy. And a Peace Academy is really the training ground for violence interrupters to come through and not just get the skill sets they need to do their job, but also to be healed in the work that they do. We call it healing the healers. Violence interrupters no different than police officers. They're at the crime scenes. They're there when the body is being covered up. One of the things that is often different, though, is that they knew that person intimately. They knew that person's family. They had been inside that household. And at the end of the day, they're required to go right back to work the next day. There is no service provided that gives them the opportunity to take the time off to heal. Often this is a position that is not covered by health benefits and things of that nature, although that is something we are working toward. But they're really influential members of our community that are working on the preventive side of gun violence prevention.
Okay, great. I'll come back to that in a minute. But Niquelle, I wanted to ask you about your work as it relates to crime and public safety issues. I mean, I know the Office of Open Government has, well, you tell me, what percentage of your time would you say over the years has involved MPD, public records, or data issues?
I think in my time at Vega, a lot. because they produce a lot of records and they get a lot of FOIA requests. I believe this past fiscal year, they got almost 3,000 FOIA requests. And to varying degrees, they will respond to them. But as we know, when you have an encounter with the police and you need that record, it's very personal. And that's the people that we interact with, the folks who are trying to get a record about themselves generally, or an incident that they were involved in. And a lot of times it has to do with body-worn camera footage, something that the DC Open Government Coalition has been very proactive in working with us and working with MPD to try to make sure that their policies reflect openness. I think one of the big problems that we've seen with MPD is an unwillingness to change. So their initial thought is to hold something back. Of course, because they're law enforcement, because they have an investigation that's happening, they don't want to compromise the investigation. But with the advent of technology, we wanted to press upon them that most things are out in the public, so there's not a necessity to do all of the redactions and things that you have been doing, and then to go forward and charge requesters for that information, and then it becomes not accessible. So those are the types of issues that, as you said, we do kind of act like an ombudsman. So we try to work between the requester and MPD to try to see if they're able to change. And we always encourage them also to promulgate policies, to let the public know the why behind what they do. And I think when the police does that, it fosters trust within the community. And I think that's one of the big problems in the district, is that you have a public that doesn't always trust its police. And transparency is a way to get there. So that is the message that we give to MPD and other government agencies. It's most public agencies that do a public safety that have this issue, and they also have the volume. So if you look at the mayor's FOIA report, you will see that most of the public safety agencies have the most requests. So if someone is dealing with those agencies and all they're getting is negativity, so to speak, then it doesn't foster that trust between the community and law enforcement. So that's what we hope that we can impress upon the police department to do, is to look at things in different ways.
And your office has issued advisory opinions on body-worn camera footage specifically, and I would actually encourage you, if you're interested in this issue, there are two advisory opinions that Niquelle's office has issued about body-worn camera footage, and the first one really does kind of give a lay of the land of what is reasonable for a police department to withhold and what is not reasonable. Typically, I mean, obviously these always depend on the facts, but for instance, your office held that in general, there is no legitimate privacy interest in blurring the faces or badge numbers of police officers who are interacting with the public in a public place.
That's correct, and we stand by that now. If I go outside on the street, I can film any police officer. I will have their badge number. They're out in the public view. So we don't see the body-worn camera footage for those officers is really any different. So charging someone an exorbitant fee to blur out something that is in the public space anyway is not a good policy to have. The police do always say that they want to protect the privacy of officers, but myself as a government official, I don't have that same protection. So I don't see why they should have something more than everyone else.
So you're as a government official, you're in a different place than a passerby or a member of the public who might have a stronger interest in privacy than an arresting officer, for instance.
That's right.
So Chris, having been in law enforcement and public safety for many years yourself, I mean, certainly there is kind of the stereotypical perception that police departments are reflexively, secretive, protective, don't want information to leak to the public whenever they can prevent it. Would you say that's, first of all, fair or unfair? And then has it changed over the years? Has the culture with respect to transparency changed? Not specifically with MPD, but just in general, would you say in law enforcement over the past few years? Because it seems like it kind of has, in the wake of George Floyd and Black Lives Matter, body-worn camera footage. There's been legislation in state legislatures saying that police departments can't withhold officer misconduct files under personnel exemption in many circumstances. So do you think there has been a change, and do you think it was ever a fair perception to begin with?
Well, I think it's more than a fair perception, and unfortunately, it's still it's a reality in many places. In fact, I think the majority of police agencies still are not where they need to be when it comes to openness and transparency. In fact, I'll go out on a limb and say it's disappointing that there are many chiefs who have learned the language of talking to the public and elected officials and the media about espousing transparency and accountability. It's almost like it's, Chief School 101. If you say it, it's almost the same as doing it, except it's really not. And I understand, having been a chief in multiple cities, that there is real resistance to this internally that comes mostly from a place of fear. And so I think it's up to police leadership, but with the help of elected officials in the community as well, to help police officers understand that, frankly, a department is better off, a city government, district government is better off when the information is out there, even when it's not good. And that's tough. But I think part of it is we have to help the public understand, and I think there have to be those in the public who are willing to support this, the idea that, okay, things are not always done the way they should be. Mistakes are made, sometimes very serious ones. There can be willful misconduct in any part of government, including police agencies. But, one of my favorite, and I think it might have been Chief Ramsey, actually, who was chief here a number of years ago, who made the comment about, the garbage doesn't smell any better 3 or 5 or 10 days later. And so we're better off getting that out there. And I think even, for example, when I was in Tucson, where there's a very small Black population, there's a very large, in fact, majority Mexican population, but very small Black. And we had use of force data that we pulled together that showed police use of force was significantly disproportionate on Black members of the community to their percentage within the community. I had even people who I thought I'd trained better at the top of my agency that were like, well, do we really need to, is this something we really need to put out there? Think of all of the, anxiety, the anger, other things that are going to come with that. But we did it, and not only did we put it out there, because see, here's the other thing. You can put data out in a way that, sure, it's out there, but is it really accessible? Is it really understandable? Is it really transparent? But we chose to be extremely transparent about it. And part of that was to go to leaders in the Black community and beyond and say, we have a problem here. We're gonna put this out to the public, but we need your help in addressing it. We need community's help in figuring out, why is this happening? What can be done differently? And I think that's where the whole idea behind transparency should lead to is, we are all in this together, whether it's media, whether it's, citizens in a community, whether it's those providing the work in government, and we gotta have the information available to us to know how to make things better, to know how to make change.
And speaking of putting things out there, your office is working on 3 reports that I think will be of great interest to the room, and I'm not going to ask you to spill the beans on what the outcomes of those reports are unless you want to. But can you give us kind of a preview of what those 3 audits are, and maybe where they are in the pipeline, like when we should look for public reports on these issues?
So first I gotta say that working within the office of the DC Auditor is an incredible experience, because you really do see the immense amount of work and the quality. Oh my goodness, I knew nothing, frankly, about auditing. I'll just be real about it. I thought they were people that just sat there with calculators and stuff like this. And what happens within ODCA are performance audits, and they can involve any part of DC government, and they're taken incredibly seriously. Kathy Patterson, who's sitting out here in the audience, known to many of you, is the DC Auditor. And let me tell you, as we would say in some of the places where I've lived, Kathy don't play. She, when we decide we're taking on an audit around an issue that's of concern to the residents of the district, or that we see is a potential problem or an issue that needs to be looked into, it is done thoroughly, carefully, and then put out there in a very open way. So the 3 audits that our new section, and I think the reason the DC Council put it under ODCA was probably because they knew Kathy would make sure things got done, but right now we're completing a staffing audit involving MPD, very important issue these days, looking at all aspects of police staffing, even issues involving our civilian, or as I prefer to use the term, professional staff being used enough within the police department. Are there ways some of the work could be done differently? How do we compare to other agencies? So that's coming out very soon. There'll be some recommendations as well that I think will be interesting and important. Another one of the audits is called SAGE, which is started with the policing project out of NYU Law School, and it stands for Sound, I'm looking at you, Sound, Accountable, Just, and Effective. There we go. And Nikki Buxell is one of the investigators in the agency, has been taking an important role there, and it's basically a barometer of about 100 metrics of good policing. And it just assesses our policies in place, what's going on, and then the department gets a score. And the community and the department can say, no, we don't want to do it that way, but nonetheless, it's scored against best practices. That'll be also out, I think, really this spring, very quick. And then the third one, which is not without its challenges for sure, involves looking at the potential influence, presence of white nationalism and hate groups within the Metropolitan Police Department here. And looking at, are there ways, what's being done in terms of policy, in terms of recruitment, in terms of how complaints are handled. Obviously, it's not about, we could not even possibly go out and count, oh, there's one there and there's one there. It's not about that. It's looking at this in a more thoughtful and preventive way. And Janelle Francis, right behind Kathy, is playing a big part of of that audit. Both Janella and Nikki are audit investigators with our section, so it's nice to have them here tonight. But that's what we're up to. Lots to come in the very near future.
Thank you. We will stay tuned for that, for sure, for all three of those. And I'm sure the last one especially will get news coverage from my employer, the Washington Post. So Marcus, when you were in DC government, you worked on what you called a true strategic plan to address gun violence in the district. And I believe that plan was completed or unveiled about a year ago, maybe longer than that.
This thing.
Yeah. I won't put you on the spot on the exact date, but before you left government, you had helped develop this plan, and would you say that can you sort of summarize what it requires and whether it's being implemented? Is some of it being implemented and some not? Is there what should the DC government be doing in your view, now that you are a civilian and you can speak freely without speaking for the mayor?
Yeah.
What should be done that isn't being done right now?
So, yeah, going back to kind of how you started the question, I feel like you just threw me a perfect alley-oop there. The issue is that the plans have been worked on and they are not being implemented. The plans have been put together, they've been paid for. We brought in subject matter experts from all over the United States to put the plans together that are very, comprehensive, data-driven. They implement both non-policing and policing policies. They actually help to formulate plans that can bring the two entities together. I challenge anyone here to Google Washington, D.C.'s strategic plan to prevent gun violence. Nothing's gonna come up. You might see that in the crime bill, but that's not that. Google the same thing for Baltimore and for Newark and for New Orleans, and their plan is gonna come out. It's gonna be clear, it's gonna be transparent, and we're talking about 3 cities that have seen major decreases in gun violence. One of the core components of this strategic plan is something called a shooting review. I'll give you just a few elements of that particular plan. During my time in government, especially my last 2 years, with much respect, such respect for the work that you've done, I sat on a call at 8:30 a.m. every morning. I was with me, and it was the chief of MPD and a couple of other colleagues. There were only about 4 of us, and we reviewed, before I got my Starbucks, we reviewed every violent incident from the night before. Everyone. And that was how you started your day. I'm sure this is something you can relate to. And then from that point, I took that information back to my violence interruption team, and there was a plan put together. What can we do about this from a retaliatory side, right? And then MPD, obviously they had some things that they were gonna do in terms of making arrests. But what was happening is we were colliding. So I'm going to help this person with resources and services, and when I get there, police are there to arrest them, which loses all credibility for the work we were doing. But a shooting review was designed to really look at, and let me give you a real number through data-driven approaches, about 265 individuals in the District of Columbia that are involved in or the victims of gun violence. I'm talking about a population of well over 700,000 now. I don't know what the new census numbers are, but I know it's a lot of people here. It's a very small number. And this plan is designed to engage one way or another with that 265. And that's what other cities are doing. If you can get your arms around them, and again, some of these folks during this shooting review, it's gonna be very clear. This person is too far across the line, he needs to be arrested. This person, on the other hand, we can change the trajectory of their lives and then go inside their homes and impact their families and break the cycle, because now their son or their daughter is not gonna see the same thing. And that's a long-term solution versus some of what's coming out right now, which is really a Band-Aid approach. I can guarantee you all in 6 months, you'll see crime go down in the District of Columbia because there's gonna be more arrests, there are gonna be more people being healed. But I want you to look at that same thing 18 months from now. Because let's be clear, we're coming home, one. And if the services inside of the jail or inside of the detention centers aren't helping us to truly rehabilitate ourselves, then who are you sending home? Someone who still now can't get a job, can't take care of their kids, can't do all the things that we know that we like to do. So they're going to choose a life that they might not want to choose based on the options that are in front of them. Not justifying a lot of the things that we see happening in our city. But what I am saying is that other cities have realized that policing has been around for 200 plus years, and violent crime in the district went up tremendously last year. Violence intervention and prevention has been around 20, and we're living in a city that's already talking about dismissing the work completely. So we just gotta understand, comprehensive plans work, but we gotta give them a chance. We gotta believe in them. We gotta invest in them in order for them to stand a chance of success.
Chris, you had something you wanted to say.
Yes, so I just 100% behind what you said. I worked as the chief of police in Richmond, California, which is close to Oakland, and when I came in, was one of the most dangerous cities per capita in the country, with homicides weekly, shootings, unbelievable. I mean, seriously, it was an intense place to live and work. And what had gone on was exactly as described. Officers were arresting. The idea was the more people we can arrest and put in jail, the more violence we're gonna stop. Except it didn't work. What did work, and you've hit the nail on the head, is first of all, you have to have a plan. It has to be one that is thought through, that involves the community, that is transparent, and that is evaluated, because you can do things that are the most well-intentioned plans in the world, and if you're not tracking what works and what doesn't work and making modifications as you go, you can have problems. But again, exactly as described, we identified less than 70 people that were the core shooters in the community, the influencers. And working together, there was a program in early stages, again, Advanced Peace. Yes. I'm sure you're very familiar. And first, the police hated the idea of having advanced peace out there, where even individuals who were caught up in this kind of life were having the chance to even be paid to be part of the program and to get various skill sets and the like. But over time, with evaluation, with transparency, with support of the community, and with the police doing more than, well, in fact, doing less of the arresting and doing more of the community engaging, over time, we were able to bring down the number of shootings and homicides. Well, it was significant. I'll just say that. So this can work, but Brother, you are so right when you're talking about the plans that just sit there. Meanwhile, while the traditional feels good kind of work just goes on and on, that's why things stay the same.
Yeah.
So 100% with you.
Yeah, I just gotta be fair to that, and that our plan came from that plan. Right, this is not a coincidence. Washington, D.C. has the Office of Neighborhood Safety and Engagement. The first one was in Richmond, California. It's not rocket science, but we do gotta open up the government and let experts come in. It might not be within inside of the halls of City Hall, and take their expertise and use it. See, look at all the stuff I can say now that I don't work with.
Keep going.
So this one is really for anyone who wants to address it. I mean, how much of the inability to implement a strategic plan would you say relates to DC's unusual status as kind of a federal city? We have a U.S. Attorney's office, not a local DA's office. We have Congress interfering in home rule. We have crime bills that are passed and then end up being controversial in the U.S. Congress. So unlike Richmond, California, or most communities, we're in a different situation with essentially this hybrid of federal and local government. Do you think that's part of what's to blame here?
That's a hard question.
I've also came in during the Williams administration,
Oh,
so
wow.
I've been in the district for government for a very long time. But yes, I think one of the problems that we have is that we do not control our prosecutions to a certain level. They're the U.S. attorneys. So the U.S. attorney is over information as well because of the nature of what they do. So taxpayers don't have any influence over that when it comes to prosecution. So then that does kind of leave us out of the process as individual taxpayers, as people who, if I was in a different city, I would be able to elect someone to do my prosecutions. And those people would have access to data that they could then give to me as a citizen. We don't necessarily have that in the district because that aspect is controlled, that information, by the federal government and is influenced through the U.S. Attorney's Office, and they do not have that same accountability to district residents as our elected officials on the local level.
Yeah, that's a great point. Niquelle, if you could sort of wave a magic wand and have an additional authority for your office, what would be on your wish list?
Well, a lot of things, but I'll start with, since we're talking about FOIA, I would like our advisory opinions to be binding, and I would like agencies to be able to rely on them. So sort of as a safe harbor. So if we have drafted an advisory opinion for you based on the Freedom of Information Act in DC, you need to do what we've suggested. Not send it to the circular file, but put it in your files. And again, if you do rely on it, that you can go to court and say, this is the advice we received. And I think that having that power influence in the district would help transparency, because it would take the fear aspect out of a lot of FOIA officers' work. And normally in the district, FOIA officer has other duties as assigned. We don't have a FOIA office. So you're dealing with individuals a lot of times who have if they're attorneys, they have a whole caseload. If they're police officers, they have other things that they have to do. So I guess if I could have some more money, I would like to have a separate FOIA office for the district. And we're coming up on budget time, and I will be bringing up to the council again, forming a commission to study open government transparency in the district that you all have also supported. So I hope that the council will see things our way and bring a whole group of people together to discuss these issues and fund solutions.
Amen to that. Yeah, FOIA is kind of an unfunded mandate, is how it's often described. And as a media lawyer advising reporters on FOIA requests, I want to say that the FOIA professionals we deal with in the government, both federal government and DC government, are usually very well intentioned, and it's not like they're withholding records out of obstinacy. It's usually they have, they're drowning in requests. It's just them, or maybe them and a couple other people dealing with, a huge number of public records requests. And my sense is they often have trouble getting the information themselves within their, it's like, they're trying to, they're representing the agency, but they're also trying to get the information internally. And I've sometimes had FOIA officers that we're dealing with on requests tell me, like, I'm trying, I haven't gotten a response, and I believe that. It's just when you have all these statutory directives to respond within 20 business days, and but then there's a couple FOIA people in a massive agency with, like MPD, with thousands of requests. It just the work needs a structure in place. So,
And if I could say also, I have been beating the drum of reform for our electronic mail, for how we handle things at the Office of the Chief Technology Officer, especially when it comes to email, because a lot of our searches are for emails, and you just get so much data as a FOIA officer that you have to go through, and it just really makes it difficult to respond timely. So the district, we can have our commission. That's one of the things I would like us to look at comprehensively, to figure out what we're gonna do with all the emails we have since 1998 to present.
Oh, that's what email started.
Yes.
Chris, in your experience as a chief, did you find that you had enough resources to deal with the public records aspects of your job? Did you have the staff? Did you have the sort of just generally the resources to handle the obligations that the law imposed on you?
Well, I agree. I don't think there's ever enough, especially with, now with body-worn camera footage where there are legal requirements for things to be redacted. There is new technology that is increasingly available that can help with this, but as with most technology, it is not perfect, and so there's still a lot of work just in the area of redaction, much less trying to find and provide other documents. But I think part of this workload can be reduced just by being more open with information in the first place, rather than having, this TV station or this public organization ask for something and then you're trying to dig it up and get it to them. Here's a really novel idea, which we do have websites, and you can take information that people are interested in and actually put it on a website in a systematic way where then everybody has access to it. And I just think, policies, one of my frustrations as one of many, as commissioner at Customs and Border Protection was the idea that why don't we just put all of our policies online so that people can look at them all? And this was frankly treated as hearsay. I mean, it was, like, we don't put something out there until we've gotten so much public concern and anger and frustration that then that's probably the time to put it up there. This is nonsensical to me. I ask, well, how many of these policies, particularly within, for example, Border Patrol, why can't we put them out there? And the answer inevitably was it would be harmful to the safety and security. This is nonsense. There are a small, very select group of policies, general orders, whatever, that deal with very specific technical things that you wouldn't want out there. 95% of an agency's other policies and directives should be available to the public and indexed appropriately, as with other data, so they're easy to find. It's really a matter of, do you want to do it or don't you? It's not so much a matter of, is it possible or isn't it?
Marcus, have you been on the other side since you left DC government? Have you been either a FOIA requester or just someone seeking information less formally? It doesn't have to be a public records request, but have you had any experiences of trying to get information out of the DC government? And have you ever found, how has that gone? Have you been frustrated?
Honestly, no. After 23 years in,
I guess you know.
I don't take the normal route to request information. So no, but I did want to kind of comment on that one, the question around the strategic plan and whether or not us being a part of a federal jurisdiction is a part of the issue. And I see it as an issue in a different way, in the sense that, I always want to be clear that my comments are never personal or about bashing our mayor, who has an extremely tough job. But she is also a mayor that goes in front of Congress and gets beat up for being soft on crime. And as a result, you're a politician and you have to make a politician move. And therefore, we are now turning into a city that is going to be overly tough on crime, primarily as it impacts Black people. It troubles me that I have constituents that I have people who I truly know believe in the work of violence prevention and intervention from a public health approach that voted in favor of a bill that clearly states that if several black men are standing at a street corner together, the police now have a right to come over, search them, ask them questions. I'm like, what are we going back to? Was this 1991? But we got a unanimous vote on that bill. It's part of the reason why some of this work, it can't live in government because it changes based on the political cycles and the political beliefs. Whereas if it belonged to the people, we can be consistent and we can have longevity with the plans we put forth. And before I let this mic go, and I don't want time to run out, I do want to just, kind of make a plea. And a part of that plea is that we need more voices if you believe in this. And if you don't, I just ask that you be fair to even hearing out what this work is and how it can work. Because the reality is we're going to have a council hearing. The same advocates are going to show up that always show up. We need people to show up who this does not impact every day, who does not have the fear of their cousin or their brother or their mom being shot based on where they live at or their zip code. I need my good new friend Jim over at the Washington Post to help me get stories out about this work, because there's going to be enough stories out about what does not work. So I just hope that you all can see a space, a small one, for whatever it is you do to be an advocate for something that could cause some true change in our city.
Absolutely. Do we need to pause? And I know we wanted to have a question and answer session. Okay, well, why don't we open it up to the audience? All three panelists said they would, well, two of the three. I guess Marcus wasn't on the call where we said this, but
Yeah, I know.
I'm sure he's fine with it.
Look like nice people.
Yeah, but they wanted to hear from you, and we would love to sort of get some audience participation. Kathy.
We ask people to go.
Oh, I'm sorry. So, can you go to the mic? Thanks.
Bring the mic to her.
Or bring the mic to her. Yeah.
No. All right.
Just take
There we go.
I'm Kathy Burns from the Society of Professional Journalists, and I wanted to ask Marcus a question. Isn't there some federal law that says you cannot describe gun powers and shootings and all this as part of health control? And how do we change that law?
You said, sorry, I believe you said it was a federal law?
Isn't it a federal law?
Well, with us being a local jurisdiction, I'm not sure how that would. I don't know the law, one, I must say, and then two, I don't know.
It's probably through Health and Human Services.
Okay.
Said when they keep the data,
Mhm.
they cannot, there's not special cases where these things involve gun violence. And either part of the problem is they don't have the data that they need. So I wondered, how do we change whatever this law is so that agencies that need this data can get it? And I think you make a very rational approach. You should probably speak to the next meeting of all the chiefs of police. I'm married to somebody in the FBI, and he had an overseas posting. And it was so interesting with all these international chiefs of police saying, well, gee, we could try that, or we could do this. And sometimes I don't think we have enough of an interchange. I mean, in the FBI, when we got married, we were the only people we knew who had a listed phone number. I said, we're both in the same house, I want more people to find me.
Yeah.
So if there's something we can do, we mean the people, to change that law, that would be a good idea. And as I mentioned to Jim earlier, we need some kind of newsletters. Maybe you could sign up for your newsletter. Or get the Post to cover this. Why is nobody from the Post here tonight to write this? Because then it falls on deaf ears. All the things on the back of the program should have been someplace or somewhere stories, and they're not just local, but they're national. This group does a great thing, and they should get the award for the best unsung heroes for raising these issues. So tell us how we change this law or get more people to show up.
Thank you, I appreciate the question. I'm gonna be fully transparent. I do need to do a little research on the particular law you were referencing. However,
I think she's talking about the prohibition on CDC, on the Center for Disease Control
CDC,
funding
that's it.
research.
Yeah.
Yes.
how does that impact DC?
So there has been a congressional prohibition on funding for the Center for Disease Control.
Got it, okay.
Grants
Yeah.
for gun
So
violence.
for those who couldn't hear, Kathy said that the law that Kathy was referring to is the Center for Disease Control. There is a law that prohibits CDC from funding research into gun violence that treats the research, that treats gun violence as a public health epidemic. Sounds like a political thing, basically.
So a couple of things with that. One is that, if you all don't know, we now have within the White House the Office of Gun Violence Prevention. And so, yeah, so a legit White House agency now that started about 7 months ago, that we have a lot of affiliation with, and I'm very fortunate to sit on national boards such as Cities United, and that's where I really get my view from for the national lens from this work. But that's something we would want to raise with that particular body now that it exists. In terms of the other conversation about speaking to the group you mentioned, I welcome every opportunity, because I truly believe that we have to be fair to folks who never heard of doing the work this way, right? Even if at the first couple of times they said that'll never work, we need to. I'm very transparent in that you have to give the folks the opportunity to learn it. If you brought something to me today that I just heard about, I would question it. I would be comfortable with what I know. And so please help me connect those dots so that I can be involved in that
Who's this White
conversation.
House person? Because I would imagine many of us have never even heard of this office.
Yeah, so it's the White House Office of Gun Violence Prevention. The deputy director is Gregory Jackson. And they're advocates, right? Like, so they're ready to be involved. The office reports directly to the vice president. We spent 2 hours at the White House. Now, this is unfounded, and it's celebrated, but at the same time, when your bubble being DC seems to be going the other way, we graduated 50 violence interrupters at the White House 2 weeks ago. Vice President spoke, and these violence interrupters were from all across the nation. This work is here. It's a real thing. We just got to continue to kind of believe in it.
Greetings and salutations.
Sir.
Good to see all of you all. Yeah, my name is Robert Vincent Brown. I'm a board member. I'm a founding board member. I'm not gonna say attributes, but one of my conditions is that I'm a community activist. And my question is on the issue of transparency. How does, I think, my brother here raised the issue of the jurisdiction configuration of DC, federal and local. How does that impact what you do, Niquelle, as far as getting information? When I can walk out on this street and be stopped by one of 6 different police officers that are not MPD. You know, and my rights can be violated. I have no actual recourse within the city because it was done by either Capitol Police, Park Police, Housing Police, you know, a sheriff on a horse, you know, who just happened to be coming through. And trying to get information in this kind of atmosphere, I know you've tried it before to get it. It's tricky. And you have people that live in my neighborhood who, when they see police, it's one person, MPD. WMATA, transit, it's just I was stopped by a cop. Secret Service can stop me. A White House I mean, so how does that affect you as far as trying to get information to get at the, who is actually arresting people in the District of Columbia and openness to get that data?
It's a very good question. The Metropolitan Police Department should have some of that information about those statistics. Now, whether or not they release them publicly, that's part of a whole problem that we have been discussing. Because with DC FOIA, they would have to confer with all those other federal agencies if they had that data to find out if they can release that data. So again, that would take a lot more time than the public is willing to wait for that information. My office, our role would be trying to facilitate those processes with a requester, trying to point them in the right direction, get them the right information. And it is a problem in the district, as you say, because we have so many police departments, but there is no clearinghouse, so to speak, for that information in the district. You would have to go through one of the law enforcement agencies, and hopefully through our partnerships with those other law enforcement agencies, you might be able to get that data through MPD, but they would have to consult them.
And one final note, Greg Jackson used to work for DC government, and he's a member of my church, and I know him. And so, you know, we can get that information to you. He's a good guy.
Thank you.
If I could just add briefly to that last point that Niquelle addressed. The Post has filed various lawsuits to try to get records relating to various aspects of January 6th. And it's been staggering how many different agencies you have to either sue or threaten to sue, you know, because there were Capitol Police, there were MPD, there were FBI. You know, it is another aspect of being in this town. Secret Service, you know, there just are a lot of different law enforcement agencies here. We have time for one more, Kirsten says.
I guess I'm the last person.
All right. Make it good.
Greetings, because my name is Robert as well.
Oh, wow.
And I'm a community advocate. I'm out in the community. I work with all of the nonprofit organizations that are not here tonight. And I've also had to interact with MPD a lot. And with that, I kind of want to direct my question to Chris, but anybody can chime in. Chris, could you speak toward the turnover? Because, I mean, in a climate that we're in, it's kind of a nuance to keep having new police chiefs to come on scene and have to prove what they're trying to do or implement something new and change. And over the past 5 to 6 years, we've been constantly having police chiefs to turn over, going on for lack of a better term, a better opportunity. And this is the nation's capital. So that is troubling to me. Also, Kathy and Chris, if you guys could include in your auditing of the amount of officers it takes to make an arrest. When a man is bench pressing and squatting weight, he has one squatter. I had probably 8 officers at my house the other evening, and it didn't take but 1 or 2. And that happens when it's a police stop or anything else. It's group arrest. And I asked the officer that was leading the inquiry that came to my home, how much did he make a year? And he said he made $120,000 a year. The guy behind him had been on the force for 16 years, so I'm assuming he's making about that much. So now you have $1 million at my home, or you have all these units, 5 to 6 cars, and I don't understand the concentration of attention to a lot of crimes that don't cause for that. So that's something I would like for you guys to look into an audit is, why does it take so many officers to detain 1 or 2 people? I've been going around the city taking pictures and just wondering, why does it take 5 officers to detain 2 children? It doesn't make sense to me. It doesn't add up. So if we were auditing anything, if we were auditing the effectiveness and the efficiency of what the officers are doing, we might find something out. But if you could speak to why we have so much turnover, or what do you think, or you suppose, I would appreciate that. Thank you.
Well, I think, you know, this is the issue of why any of a number of things are happening at a police department are all good areas for further exploration. I think we're fortunate that we have the office that I'm part of, but even the entire ODCA can only take on so many issues at any given time, because they're all complicated in their own right, and many, you just named several, merit closer examination. I have to agree, I've wondered on many occasions, does it really take this many officers to do this? I mean, I came from, Tucson, not that much smaller in population. I get it, a very different city from DC, but, we had a much smaller pie of officers, We had 800 officers. And so you have to figure out ways to respond to calls differently. How does the community prioritize calls? How can members of the community even help with handling certain types of situations? Do the police need to go out on everything? And so these are discussions that need to go on between police and community to prioritize resources, to make decisions about who's going to do what, and then to figure out what do you really need to deal with different aspects of public safety in the community. I think, again, our office, we're certainly looking forward to ways that we can help with that exploration. But candidly, I'd also say, and Kathy and I have had this discussion several times, I mean, I think a chief should be working with the community to figure out how policing should be done, what the approaches should be taken to dealing with violence, to a whole series of other things. I am not sure that there are a lot of folks that want to come in, and this is not just DC, this is a lot of cities, and try to be a chief where you have a mayor or others who are deciding this is how things are going to go. Where you have even a council legislating policy about this is what's going to happen. I don't know. I would not want to be a chief in that environment, because it's like if you hire me, if the community hires me, and it should be a community process, and I tell you what kinds of change I want to make, and that's in sync with the community and the council and the mayor, then it's a radical idea, but I need to be given the opportunity to work with folks like Marcus and others and to pull together a plan to address community needs and to look at policing priorities and how the work is done. If that's imposed on me, something that's, I just think that's not a great strategy. So I think members of this community have to figure out what kind of relationship they want with their police department, and then be given enough time. A chief has to have enough time to make something work. You can't just throw something on the wall, get frustrated because crime's still not going down fast enough. Okay, well, shit, let's try something else. Throw this on the wall.
Wow.
See how it goes. Oh, it's still panic. It's still not fast enough. Now get it, bring a new chief in. That'll do the trick. I mean, this is a community issue. It has to start there, but it has to be heard at the executive level within the police department and within the elected leadership. I don't know how to get around any other way. No shortcuts, I don't think.
Well, I think we're at time for our panel, but please join me in thanking all three of these terrific panelists.